Hey, everybody. It is Friday, November 1st. Welcome to a new month here on the Mo News Podcast on this Friday. I'm Mo Schwanunu.
And I'm Jill Wagner. This is the place where we bring you just the facts.
And we read all the news and read between the lines so you don't have to. I'll be gone till November, January, February, March, April, May. One of the better Wyclef songs from the 90s, Jill.
I do not hate starting this podcast with a 90s Wyclef song, Moshe. Nicely done.
The Fugees, one of the first CDs that I ever bought. And then, of course, there was the Carnival album. I think that's when you would have to buy a whole CD and listen to the whole album. And so I just remember listening to, that and they would have to craft the album, and Wyclef would have these like random interludes. Anyway, like these days we just, make our mixes on Spotify or whatever. But back then there was an arc. There was an arc to an album, and I appreciate that. And I want to give a shout out to those. And I know that some artists still, put together an album with a flow, whatever, but it's, it feels throwback at this point.
Moshe, how was Halloween?
Halloween was great. I'm literally still wearing it. If you're watching us on YouTube, this is my part of my sleepy getup. Our daughter Alex was.
You are sleepy because your daughter Olivia. My daughter's Alex. Your wife is Alex.
It took me a second. I go, wait, my daughter's not named Alex. My daughter's named Olivia.
And I'm so used to being like my daughter Alex. I'm like,
it took you a few seconds. You're like, wait, is Moshe's daughter's name Alex too? That'd be weird because his wife's name is Alex. No, my daughter Olivia was Snow White, and then Alex and I went as Sleepy the Dwarfs. And my mother-in-law, Melissa, joined as Happy the Dwarf. So we got her out there. She'll only remember it through photos, obviously, at 1 year old. But it was, an 80-degree Halloween here in New York City. So it was a beautiful evening to get out.
Well, I had said on our podcast yesterday, for anyone who listened, that I was going to leave my 2-year-old son at home because he wasn't going to remember Halloween. And somebody messaged me, and they were just kind of like, I know it's not my business, but I do think you should take him because even if he's not going to remember it, you're going to remember it. I still look at videos of my kids when they were 2 and 3 knocking on doors saying trick or treat. And it got me. I took him and we had a great family outing. Yes,
I
really appreciated the comment.
And guilting Jill. Yeah. Not really guilting Jill. Convincing Jill.
A little guilt, but it was a great time, and it was nice. We did it as a family.
How could you?
Leaving your son home.
What kind of mother are you?
No, but I appreciated it because I did wind up taking my son, and because of that, my husband came, and we had a great time.
All right. And a quick programming note, as we look back at Halloween, we're looking ahead to tomorrow. Daylight saving time ends. And so just a reminder there, obviously, we all have these digital devices that automatically turn the clocks back, but just a heads up, that's about to happen. You'll get an hour of extra sleep on Saturday night. Your kids will wake up an hour earlier on Sunday morning. And
Moshe, it is also Diwali. So for everyone who celebrates, wishing you a lovely Diwali and a wonderful year ahead.
Yes, the Hindu Festival of Lights, important holiday, the biggest and most important holiday of the year in India and for Indians around the world. So I hope everyone has an amazing one.
Okay, let's get to the news here. 4 days until Election Day. Moshe, stop me if you've heard this before. New polls show Donald Trump and Kamala Harris are neck and neck in some key swing states.
No surprise, Jill, but we're here with the latest headlines as we count down the days until this election is finally over.
Yes, another day, another political controversy. Donald Trump says that he will protect women, quote, whether they like it or not. Kamala Harris jumping on those comments as she makes her push for female voters. Also, a final look at inflation before the election, what we learned about prices, and will it matter to voters?
And we're looking for the final jobs number this morning, so look out for that to rule the headlines today.
In tech news, OpenAI is bringing some search features to ChatGPT, looking to challenge Google. And a follow-up to a story we first mentioned earlier this week, someone has been arrested after hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of cheddar cheese was stolen in London.
Yes, we know who stole the cheese. Jill, it was a boomer.
Okay, boomer. Meanwhile, Starbucks is trying to boost business by going back to its roots, and that means Sharpies are back, and how the Dodgers' Shohei Ohtani brought a lot more fans to this year's World Series. Plus, it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend, what we are watching, reading, and eating.
Lots of Halloween candy. Lots of it.
All right, 4 days to go until Election Day, and another day of polls shows that this race is going to be neck and neck. According to a new CNN poll, neither Vice President Kamala Harris nor former President Trump has established a clear advantage in two key southern battleground states. In Georgia, likely voters are 48% for Trump to 47% for Harris, and in North Carolina, Harris stands at 48% to Trump's 47%, but both of those results are well within the margin of error.
And Jill, that comes as we've gotten some recent polls in recent days from Fox News, from CBS News, from the New York Times, all of them effectively saying the same thing, which is this thing is too close to call.
So North Carolina narrowly went for Barack Obama in 2008, but has voted Republican in the past three presidential elections. In 2020, though, it was the state where Trump got his slimmest margin of victory. And in Georgia, Joe Biden defeated Trump by less than 1 percentage point 4 years ago, becoming the first Democrat to win the state since Bill Clinton in 1992. Also of note, 95% of likely voters in each state now say that they have made up their minds about who they are voting for. So that leaves a very small pool of potentially movable voters, although that 5%, with it being so close, is potentially enough to sway the election, Moshe, I thought your conversation with Jonah Goldberg of The Dispatch was fascinating, in which he talked about these quote unquote undecided voters and why both campaigns are trying to say that it is like the end of the world if the other candidate gets elected.
Yeah, Joe, this is a conversation I had a couple days ago with Goldberg, who's a conservative over at The Dispatch, but calls balls and strikes on really both parties. And we go in depth on a whole variety of topics. But what he's talking about here in this bite is that the undecided voters he's talking about are the people who already lean one direction. The question is whether they'll get off the couch for their candidate. So it's not about convincing an independent in the middle, of which there are some, right? The so-called Nikki Haley voters, et cetera. It's more about, well, if I got up to vote, I would vote for Trump. Or if I got up to vote, I would vote for Harris. And so how do you get those people off the couch? You scare the hell out of them.
So a lot of the stuff that we're hearing and talking about on cable news about, how does this move undecided voters? How does this persuade persuadable voters? Misses the point, because the persuasion part is to get the very low propensity people who aren't going to get off the couch for a difference in public policy issues, but might get off the couch if you can convince them it's the end of America.
So you can listen to much more of that conversation over on our Mo News Interview podcast. So search Mo News Interview and make sure you're subscribed to that podcast as well. And the key thing we talk about here really is that you're motivating people to get out by saying the world is ending. Republicans saying that Kamala Harris is a communist who's going to take away your guns, mandate daily vaccines, force you to have an electric vehicle, turn America into a Venezuelan wasteland right now. And then you have Democrats saying Trump is a fascist, Hitler-loving guy who will end democracy, end all elections for the rest of time, put journalists, gay people, a whole variety of folks in internment camps, and the ability to marry someone outside your race. That was literally a conversation that happened on The View over on ABC in recent days. So it's pretty wild here, the things that are being pushed out and circulated. And again, it's because, well, you already know that a certain number of Americans are going to get out to vote. How do you get those others that are like, do I need to vote, or I'm not sure? Well, let me light a fire under you by using, some of this language or some of these threats. Speaking of extremes and how each side has been taking lines from the other to try to play to their advantage, try to get the other side, try to get their side to vote. We've been talking about the various, the whole garbage trash exchange this week on the campaign trail. Well, a new controversy lit up in the last 24 hours. It plays into the gender divide we've been talking about. We've been telling you about this record gender divide this year, women voting for Harris, men going to Trump, and the Harris campaign really playing to the abortion issue, the Trump campaign really playing to men's issues. And so this latest back and forth was touched off on Wednesday night. Trump was at a campaign event in Wisconsin, that swing state. And so he is giving one of his rally speeches where he goes on a variety of topics. And this is the part that caught some attention here. He's talking about how his advisors have told him to stop saying he would protect women because it sounded inappropriate. We'll play for you the full context of his remarks right here.
They said, we think it's very inappropriate for you to say. I said, why? I'm president. I want to protect the women of our country. They said, sir, I just think it's inappropriate for you to say. Pay these guys a lot of money. Can you believe it? I said, well, I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not. I'm going to protect them. I'm going to protect them from migrants coming in. I'm going to protect them from foreign countries.
So note the end of what Trump said there. Whether the women like it or not. I'm going to do it whether the women like it or not. That is the segment of the bite here that Democrats jumped on immediately after the speech. You saw circulating on social media. Kamala Harris chastising Trump about it on Thursday multiple times. Again, really focused on whether the women like it or not, despite the fact that he's, again, talking about protecting women from the border, etc. The tone there about doing something, whether women like it or not, she feels plays into his overall thoughts and feelings about women, his respect for women or lack thereof, as far as she's concerned. And so here's a bit of Kamala Harris responding to that part of the remarks.
He does not believe women should have the agency and authority to make decisions about their own bodies. This is the same man who said women should be punished for their choices. He simply does not respect the freedom of women or the intelligence of women to know what's in their own best interest and make decisions accordingly.
So, Jill, in these final days, literally taking phrases from each candidate and trying to use them to your advantage to really churn out every single vote you can get.
Yeah, Moshe, the reason that this is resonating is that for many critics, it evokes the numerous sexual misconduct allegations against Donald Trump. Harris has also made reproductive rights a huge issue in this campaign. We know abortion is on the ballot in many states across the country.
Yeah, I got a lot of notes last night on Instagram because we put up these clips on Instagram. Some people on the Harris side saying, she was totally right here to play up these remarks. Some people on the right, as well as some folks in the middle, actually saying, I don't like that these remarks are being taken out of context. But ultimately, again, you see this happen on both sides here. One thing that we dove into yesterday on Instagram as well was some of the political ads that are playing, and it reminded everyone on Instagram, there are no rules in America about lying or misleading in your political ads. It's all part of your First Amendment, freedom of speech. The Supreme Court has ruled on this, that effectively politicians can lie to you, they can mislead you, and that ultimately the Supreme Court, in its most recent ruling back in 2012, said that the resolution, the fix for mistruths and lies in campaigns is truth on the other side. And so ultimately, just letting you guys know, because people are like, how is this allowed? Nope, you can lie. First Amendment. That's where we're at. No, but it turns out you can lie. The First Amendment protects false and misleading speech. And so that is where we're at. It's up to the platform and up to you and I and up to the other politicians out there to correct things that are false and misleading. Jill, one other thing that I wanted to get to here, because it's creating a lot of headlines here in the final days, a question has come up about Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s role in the Trump administration. Remember, he's a former Democrat, like all the Kennedys are or were at some point, turned independent candidate, then endorsed Trump. Part of the deal with Trump is that Trump would give him some sort of role in a Trump White House. Well, Kennedy, in a recent Zoom, said that Trump has promised that Kennedy can run the Health and Human Services Department, the FDA, the CDC, and NIH. First of all, a role like that does not exist, but it freaks some people out. Like, oh my God, how much power will Kennedy have? Trump at that rally back on Sunday at Madison Square Garden said, I'm going to let Kennedy go crazy on health and other issues. Not really defining what go crazy means, but that's what Trump has said about Kennedy. So there has been a lot of discussion in the past 48 hours here of What would his role be? Also, given his controversial background here, sharing at times misleading and false information about vaccines and links to things, there's going to be an issue for him getting confirmed to a role like the head of the CDC or HHS, which requires Senate confirmation, which even if Republicans take the Senate, Kennedy's going to have a tough time. He's got a lot of critics out there, a lot of questionable background. We haven't even gotten to the dumping of the dead bear in Central Park, Jill. And so besides the point, so right now there's been a lot of questions of the Trump campaign. What are your plans for Kennedy? NBC reporting late last night that Trump officials believe they'll give him a role leading what they call Operation Warp Speed for childhood chronic disease. Warp Speed, if you recall, was the program to create a COVID vaccine, Operation Warp Speed. So they want to create a similar program to deal with childhood chronic disease, which actually is an important issue and wouldn't be controversial if not linked to Robert F. Kennedy Jr., given his background, given some of his views, etc. So that's something among the things we're watching here. But as you think about who you're voting for president, remember, they are just one individual. They are going to be bringing into the government dozens, hundreds, thousands of people. And so, ultimately with your vote, you're electing a team.
That's right. It's cabinet positions. It's literally thousands of political appointees.
Yeah, and we're talking about the National Security Council. We're talking about people you've never heard of before, but they come in under other folks. And so ultimately, as you think about it, like we always say to I was talking about this on the Instagram Premium account in the last couple of days, when I was talking to people who still are undecided about who they're going to vote for, you're ultimately electing a bus driver that's taking you in the direction, or a pilot, pick your transportation metaphor, a ship captain, taking you in the direction you want to be going in. It's not going to get you to the final destination. It might not even get you halfway there. But are you going in general direction that you want to go in given who is in charge and the team of thousands they bring with them?
All right, time for the speed read from Politico. The final pre-election inflation reading dropped on Thursday morning with data showing that inflation broadly continues to cool as it has done for the past 2 years. It is good news for the Fed and perhaps more importantly for Kamala Harris. But
we did it, Joe. Was that the quote from 2020?
But whether she can turn the reality into real impact next week remains to be seen. So by the numbers here, prices climbed just 2.1% compared with a year earlier, which is about back to the Fed's 2% inflation goal. But the report also shows that price increases are stickier under the surface, with so-called core inflation ticking up a bit on a monthly basis. And Moshe, something that we have talked about on this podcast before, just because inflation, the rate of inflation has dropped, prices have gone up so dramatically. They're not falling. They're just going up less slowly. So when you go to the grocery store, yes, I complain about this all the time on the podcast, but when you go to the grocery store, it is still really, really expensive because prices aren't dropping. They're just not going up so quickly.
They're cooked. Prices never really drop. I mean, food and energy prices do sometimes drop. That's why they're not included in what you mentioned, core inflation numbers. So core inflation takes the prices of things that don't include food and energy, and that's the sticky prices that you're talking about. You don't typically see prices dropping unless we go into a recession or depression. So it's typically a sign of a major economic catastrophe to actually see prices drop significantly. So this is where we're at right now. The New York Times pointing out that despite the rosy outlook for the economy, polling shows, and we've talked about this on this podcast a lot, that voters still feel very glum about the recent track record. People feel like things are going in the wrong direction. The numbers right now show, Jill, that nearly 2/3 to 3/4 of Americans believe that the country is headed in the wrong direction. There's actually something that I think recently Kamala Harris was asked about in the interview she did with Fox News' Brett Baer. And she didn't have much of an answer there. In fact, at one point she says it's because Donald Trump is still running for president. So, they've had trouble answering for that. But there is this idea, this feeling of pessimism, for good reason with inflation, et cetera, but also just the sort of information environment we live in these days, the negativity, the social media, et cetera. So a combination of factors there. Confidence has started to creep up again though, as inflation has cooled, consumer confidence in the state of the economy, but still not at historic levels. We're still basically at a level we were at in the last recession back in 08 and 09. Now, one thing we should say, we talked about the economic numbers yesterday. We got these economic numbers. There's going to be a jobs report today. We'll see where the numbers land there. But whoever wins the White House this month will enter office with an economic strength not seen in years when you look at the bottom line statistics here, the stock market, the GDP, et cetera. That's why Democrats are, the Democratic leaders are wondering, like, what are we doing wrong here communications wise? Because the numbers here show a wind at our back as far as the economy is concerned, but just people do not feel that way. So ultimately here, good news either way. Interesting historical anecdote. 3 of the last 4 newcomers to the presidency took over basically during a recession. Biden took over during the COVID recession. Obama took over during the 08-09 recession with that stock market collapse. Bush took over in 2000 as there was that dot-com collapse and a slight recession. The only president who took over not in a recession in the past 2 decades was Trump in 2017, which is why you've heard Obama on the campaign trail recently being like, that wasn't his economy, that was my economy. And so it looks like at this juncture, whether Harris wins or Trump wins, it'll be a repeat of 2017, taking control of an economy that's actually going in the right direction.
Moshe, you did refer to Democrats and their frustration about why the good economy is not resonating with voters.
Yeah.
And I hate to sound like a broken record. Food prices.
Yeah.
Everybody has to eat and everyone goes food shopping and it's torture. It is so expensive. And that is something it's you do it every week or however often you do it. And it's just this constant reminder that things cost a lot more and your dollar does not go far.
Yeah, the inflation is baked in. The damage is done here, right? And so that is where we're at. And that is the feeling, out there. And so ultimately, you could also say that some of these numbers, economic numbers, don't reflect the gig economy, don't reflect the post-COVID economy. They're not, are they able to effectively calculate for all the people who are working part-time, who have become entrepreneurs? Traditional jobs numbers don't account for all of that. So even though you see these kind of top line economic indicators, there's a lot happening beneath the surface in the world's largest economy that is probably not being accounted for. And therein lies some of the issues here that they're not able to better gauge with these reports that come out every couple of weeks.
From Bloomberg, OpenAI is bringing search features to ChatGPT in a challenge to Google. It is called ChatGPT Search. The new option will let users search for timely information, kind of like they would on the web. The responses will have inline attribution to news publishers and other data sources. The search feature will give users up-to-the-minute sports scores, stock quotes, news, weather, and more. And it is powered by real-time web search and partnerships with news and data providers, according to the company. OpenAI does have licensing deals with publishers like News Corp, Reuters, the Associated Press, Time Magazine, and also some European media companies like Le Monde. The company hopes the move will let it better compete with search engines like Google and Microsoft's Bing.
Bing. You're a Binger. Were you ever a Binger, Jill?
Not once.
Never binged.
Never binged.
Well, I'm playing with the ChatGPT search function right now. I said, my first search in it because it's available right now to ChatGPT Plus people. I'm one of the paid members because, again, I'm trying to work in how we can better use AI here. Still hard in the news sense. And I search, and my search just now as we were recording this is, what's the latest Mo News podcast? And then they said the latest Mo News podcast is October 31st, 2024. And then they listed stories from a podcast last week. So it's still not there. Just letting you know, that was my real-time experiment there with ChatGPT Plus search, which, I guess they're working on over time. It's brand new, so we'll give them time here. But I do have friends, Jill, who use ChatGPT for all their searches because it's a better, basically, second memory for you. So you can, type in there various things, restaurants that you like, meals that you've had, groceries that you're looking for, and you can ask ChatGPT that stuff, whereas you can't ask Google that stuff. Like, hey, what were the 3 things I wanted to get at the grocery store this week? ChatGPT can do that for you. So there's some unique features of ChatGPT that could make it really compelling in the coming years. And right now, they already have 250 million active monthly users right now. And that is why there's a fire under Google right now to better their artificial intelligence. And as we've been talking about in the podcast this week, Apple with their AI, Apple Intelligence.
So you mean ChatGPT can tell me why I walked into a room when I absolutely have no idea what
Maybe
I went in
point.
for? Why did I come into this room here? Why did I go down to the kitchen?
Between ChatGPT and Alexa, you should be able to get that answer at some point, Jill. They're all watching us.
All right, a follow-up to the big cheese heist story that we told you about earlier this week from NBC.
Who stole the cheese? Tell us who stole the cheese.
From NBC News, in the end, it may have just been too much cheddar to make a clean getaway. A 63-year-old man has been arrested after more than 24 tons of artisanal cheese from one of Britain's most famous dairy companies was stolen. He was detained on suspicion of fraud by false representation and handling stolen goods. The whereabouts of the stolen cheese, though, have yet to be determined. Police say this is an ongoing investigation. That cheese is worth nearly $400,000. It was taken from the London cheese specialist Neal's Yard Dairy on October 21st by a fraudulent buyer posing as a wholesale distributor for a major French retailer, which, as we had reported, Neal's Yard Dairy was very flattered by, that there was this French wholesaler that wanted some British cheese.
Yeah, they're like, oh my God, the French are willing to buy British cheese? That is so great. Well, it turned out it was a 63-year-old guy who stole the cheese. He has apparently made bail. Jill, no other details as I checked the BBC just now on the man who stole 50,000 pounds of cheddar cheese. Every wheel of cheese had been delivered before Neal's Yard realized they'd been scammed. Basically, they didn't take a down payment. They delivered 400 grand of cheese and they were like, okay, now you owe us 400 grand, and never got the payment, reported it to police. And now they found the guy. We'll stay on this story. It's an important story for all of us here in these times of really difficult stories. We're like, you know what? We like the the stolen cheese story. And so they found the man. They haven't found the cheese yet. We'll stay on top of the story. My favorite quote, though, British chef Jamie Oliver was talking about this in one of the reports, and he advised cheese enthusiasts to be wary of suspiciously large quantities of premium cheddar on the black market. The quote, naturally, remember, if the deal seems too Gouda to be true, it probably is.
I was hoping you were going to deliver that line, and I appreciate it.
Did I land it? Did I make the landing? All right. Even though the story's about cheddar, you got to make a reference to Gouda. You know.
From CNBC, Starbucks plans to return to its roots, and that involves 200,000 Sharpies. Their new CEO, Brian Niccol, says it's part of his plan to win back customers. For our younger listeners, the markers are for baristas to write names on cups like they did before they started to get printed on labels. And it's not...
back in the aughts, back in the early part of the century,
Exactly.
They were still writing our names on cups and misspelling them every single time.
A thing of beauty, Moshe, I do feel bad for you. I feel like yours is well, not necessarily your first name. I think luckily you don't give your last name at Starbucks.
Dude, they couldn't even get my first name.
But it isn't just the Sharpies. The 17,000 U.S. stores are also bringing back ceramic mugs for customers who are staying in the cafe, and flavor bars so you could pour some milk or sugar into your own drink. That I really appreciate. I'm not a huge Starbucks person, but I want to do my own milk and sugar. I like I have my own combo. I know exactly what I like. Anyway, Niccol has only been with the company since early September, but he thinks that some small personal touches will bring customers back to cafes. And he wants the chain to become what he calls a, quote, third place again, referencing the concept of a place to work and socialize outside of the home or office.
Starbucks, hang out there with your ceramic mug, the flavor bar. Brian Niccol, by the way, did a great job at Chipotle. One of the reasons why they brought him to Starbucks here with a huge bonus structure. I mean, he could make $100 million if he does this job correctly and helps revive the company. And he's thinking about the bottom line here. The company's numbers have been down. We've talked earlier this week about how Americans are also trying to save on coffee and recalculating how they, how much they're making at home and whether they go out. So you really need to incentivize people to head to Starbucks, make it a special or unique experience again. And so one of the things he's looking at is similar to when Steve Jobs came back as the CEO of Apple. He's trying to simplify things, make things clear. They believe they have too many drinks on the menu. So you might see sort of some drinks start to get dropped here. At some point this month, the olive oil infused drinks will be removed from the menu. And apparently we can expect to see other changes in the coming months.
Not the olive oil.
Jill, I don't know if you guys saw this, but if you give a Google to Starbucks recipes, apparently, and I haven't confirmed this with Starbucks, but given the headlines, it appears a disenchanted Starbucks employee took pictures of all of their drinks, all the recipes for their drinks, and posted them on social media. So you can now make all your favorite Starbucks drinks yourself. Basically, this person was upset about being fired or something that went down. And so they basically revealed all of Starbucks's recipes. So you can give that a Google. Apparently, it's out there.
Or a ChatGPT search.
Not based on my ChatGPT search just now.
You may not get the right.
I'm always correcting it. Sometimes I'll search there and I'm just like, ChatGPT for On This Day in History, what happened on October 20th or whatever? And they're like, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, that didn't happen. And ChatGPT is like, you're right, Moshe, that didn't happen on October 20th. I'm like, ChatGPT, get your act together.
That is the low-hanging fruit of ChatGPT search. It should be On This Day in History.
Yes.
And the fact that they can't get that right is a little bit problematic. And finally, from CNN, a follow-up to the Dodgers World Series win over the Yankees. Baseball superstar Shohei Ohtani has turned millions of Japanese residents into fans of the LA Dodgers, so much so that more than a tenth of the country's population tuned into the World Series, giving the Fall Classic better TV ratings in Japan than in the United States. The manager of a sports bar in Japan says that Ohtani is an honorable person in Japan and that they've never had any Japanese person like that before. So he is really idolized there.
Yeah, Japan already has a pretty good baseball culture. A lot of East Asia does, Taiwan, South Korea, etc. But Ohtani really just such a superstar. And so baseball really popular over there as they try to keep baseball popular here. It continues to kind of diminish in popularity among age groups, especially among young people. The average age of baseball watchers versus the NFL, the NBA, the NHL, much older. And that's been a concern for baseball. It's one of the reasons they instituted a pitching clock, trying to make the games shorter, etc. And so this is helpful to baseball as, again, they face some challenges here in the U.S., really kind of boosting their presence in Japan. Keep in mind the Japanese population is 125 million compared to the U.S.'s 330 million. So a pretty significant population there. And apparently, Japanese increasingly are making the trip across the Pacific Ocean to go see games, including in LA to go see Ohtani. And of course, the Dodgers also, winning the World Series this week against the Yankees, have the pitching sensation Yamamoto as well, who's here on a multi-million dollar deal, $325 million deal. So a big boost there for the Dodgers, for tourism in LA and Major League Baseball.
All right, Moshe, it is Friday. Cheers to the freaking weekend. Time for what we are watching, reading, and eating. Moshe, what will you be watching?
Jill, The Diplomat Season 2 out on Netflix. I don't know if you've caught that, right? I think I told you a couple weeks ago that you got to start watching that.
Yes, it is on my list. You know what? I started watching the first season and then I don't know why. I liked it. for whatever reason, I kind of stopped, but I need to get on that.
Yeah, so it's Kerry Russell as the ambassador to France. And so, yes, it's Kerry Russell as an ambassador. Pretty compelling. There are elements of it that are probably unrealistic in terms of her influence, given her level, if you're really kind of as somebody who covers politics, etc. But still very compelling. And so looking forward to starting to binge that this weekend. What are you watching?
Moshe, I'm going to be watching the Martha Stewart documentary on Netflix. It's called Martha. And she herself actually says she's really unhappy with how it turned out, which for whatever weird reason makes me actually want to watch it. So she says she gave the filmmaker full access to her archive, which he used very little of. She told the New York Times, the last scenes with me looking like a lonely old lady walking hunched over in the garden. Boy, I told him to get rid of those and he refused. She says she hates the last scenes. I'm a huge Martha Stewart fan, actually. So I'm curious to watch it. And there's been some juicy tidbits that have come out as well.
Martha Stewart still rocking at 83 years old. Jill, I was had the fortune of being able to sit at a table with her at a dinner several months ago. And
who are you?
Once in a while, there's some perks to doing this media thing. And she was like, having a couple drinks, and then she like left the dinner early. And I was talking to one of her people, and they're like, "Oh yeah, no, she's got like another thing to get to tonight." I'm like, she's 83 and like hitting the town of New York, in New York City on like a random weeknight. Like, good on her.
And I can't stay up past 9:30. So kudos to Martha Stewart.
By the time you're 83, Jill, you will be going to multiple parties on a weeknight in New York City.
All right, Moshe, what are you reading?
So it's less what I'm reading and more what I'm listening to. The Pivot podcast, not the Pivot podcast that you listen to, a different Pivot podcast. This one has former President Obama on it, and read some write-ups around what he said, a number of compelling headlines. And what I found particularly interesting was he was talking about his daughters, Malia and Sasha, who are now in their 20s, trying to make their careers on their own and effectively drop the Obama last name because they don't want to get jobs and succeed based on the Obama name and the fact that their dad was president. So, in fact, Malia recently was involved in some movie and TV production and going with her name Malia Ann and dropping the Obama. So I thought that was interesting.
I still think they're going to figure it out. Just
Malia,
a hunch.
I only know like one Malia who might be in her 20s. Could you be Malia Obama?
And like when they meet her, you look familiar. Did we watch you grow up in the White House?
I was going to say both the daughters look exactly like their parents, so it's not hard to tell. Anyway, but kudos to them for at least trying, given that we do know that there's some Nepo presidential children who definitely try to utilize their parents.
So it is funny that you mentioned the Pivot podcast before I did, because I'm the biggest fan of that podcast, especially I love Scott Galloway. But it's funny because he always says to Kara Swisher, who's his co-host, that they kind of get like B-list people on that podcast, and she saves all of the A-list people for her podcast. Mm-hmm. So it's cool that they got the former president.
Jill, what are you reading?
Moshe, I am reading this article in the Washington Post called, and it's a little bit of an aggressive title here. It is called Guns, Knives, Bats, Hammers, Hatchets, Spears. It's about how incidents of road rage have escalated across the country and how aggressive drivers in Texas are trying to understand what triggers anger. It's something that I'm really aware of. Living in the suburbs, I drive everywhere, and you hear these horror stories about how, you honk at somebody or whatnot, and they get out of the car with a bat, and it's pretty scary. So I am curious to see what this article's all about. Okay, Moshe, in much lighter news, what are you eating? Dare I guess it has something to do with Halloween?
Two words, Jill. Candy corn.
Sure you are.
Actually, I should say from the trick-or-treating, we didn't get any candy corn.
Well, because it's like it's a loose candy.
Well, I think you can do like snack packs of candy corn, like potentially. But yeah, ultimately we got a lot of Twix, we got a lot of Reese's, so that was very nice. Somebody sent us actually a picture of their trick-or-treat pickup in Salt Lake City, and saying, I guess your numbers were right. We got a lot of peanut M&Ms in Utah being one of the handful of states where peanut M&Ms is the most popular candy, and I like crushed it here with peanut M&Ms. So I guess those numbers are in fact accurate. Okay, so not eating actual candy corn, Halloween candy is the answer. And also, I want to give a shout out to a cafe sandwich shop here on the Upper East Side called Mellow Yellow over on First Avenue. As we have just moved to the neighborhood, one of my go-tos. So check out Mellow Yellow if you're over in the 80s on First Avenue.
They call you Mellow Yellow.
Jill, that's some boomer music that we're familiar with there.
It still works.
It still holds.
Jill, you know what?
Jill, I'm probably not surprised, but what are you eating this weekend?
So I mentioned that I did decide to take my son, who's 2 years old, trick-or-treating, and he has a huge bag of candy, none of which he is allowed to eat. So thank you, Grayson. Mama is going to have some candy this weekend.
No, he's too young to notice.
He's too young, exactly.
Yeah.
And no one messaged me about this. I'm not getting guilted about eating my son's Halloween candy. He is too young to eat it.
Jill, you stand by that. You can die on that hill.
All right. Literally, after I eat all that candy.
Die on that hill of candy. Yeah.
All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Mo News Podcast. Please share this with your friends. It will help us grow. Follow us and subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Review us in the App Store. Guys, we're in the home stretch. We are almost there this election season. Almost done. 4 days. By the time we talk to you on Monday, the election will be, we could say, tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll have coverage all weekend on Mo News Premium. Our final election series, we have a special election series for Mo News Premium, is today. So definitely sign up for that over at mo.news/trial. It's a way to support us and get access to all the extra content. And how can you go into the final weekend of the election and not have access to all the coverage that's happening 24/7? So we do that all over on the Mo News Premium Insta. Again, mo.news/free trial to check it out.
All right, everyone, have a wonderful weekend.